All right, so let's talk about web dev in 2022 and the path you should follow to become a really good developer. So let's open a website here called roadmap.sh, which is a pretty cool website. So I'm assuming front end, so let's go with that. And let me tell you what's actually useful from this roadmap and what is not. All right, so HTTP, of course, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol is going to be very useful. So everything, the basics, take a look at it. Then, of course, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, very useful, particularly ES6. This is really nice. Version control systems, yes, particularly Git and Github. So totally do that. Web security, you need at least HTTPS and CORS. CORS is cross-origin resource, what's the S? Something. Sharing. And that's important because most of the times you will be importing scripts and style sheets from other websites, and you want to make sure those things are valid. So usually with CORS, and I see very few developers doing this, when you import a style sheet or a JavaScript file from another website, you need to have, if you want to have valid HTML, you need to have the integrity tag, attribute, and the key, the hash key that pertains to that particular file, to so that you're sure that is actually the correct file and you're not being sent something else. CSS architecture, I don't actually recommend this. BEM is not very used anymore. Sass, not really anymore. For the most part, people use CSS and JavaScript, which is much more powerful, particularly styled components. Of course, you can use style components with React or without React, but React is definitely something I would also recommend. So in terms of build tools, you don't need any of these things. Just go for NPM, and maybe in 22 take a look at Deno, which is so NPM is the Node Backend Manager. Node is the task runner that is very famous, and Deno is the kind of the next version of Node made by the same creator. So I'm guessing, I'm kind of what's the word? Envisioning? It's not envisioning, is predicting that Deno will really take off in 2022, and it is a great tool. Definitely take a look at ESLint, absolutely, for sure. React, absolutely. Redux, I would say try to use state and the context API in React as much as possible, and don't really go for Redux on from the start, because Redux is a tool that you will only need in a very particular case. So there's a post that I can link to in the description from the creator of Redux, and he explains that you may not need Redux. Like it's not the first tool you should go for. The use state hook, React hook, and the context API are there for a reason. You should use them much more than you use Redux. Definitely don't recommend Angular Vue because, well, there's React. Style components, absolutely. CSS modules, absolutely. Web components, absolutely. Learn them. They need to mature a little bit more, but definitely keep an eye on this. CSS frameworks, honestly, Tailwind, nothing else. in terms of testing your apps, absolutely go for React testing library and Cypress. Just if you have a lot of unit tests, but try to go for as much end-to-end tests as you can, because if the end-to-end tests work, then everything else works as well. Think of it like a factory where you have, think about a factory line, and you have several steps in that factory line. Every single step should be tested when you are building the factory line, because you want to make sure the product is modified correctly until it reaches the end of the line and is correctly made. However, once you do have the product being correctly made and you have checks in place at the end of the line, then you don't really need all the tests that come before it. This is actually a bad practice to if you can afford to do end-to-end tests from the start, you don't need as many unit tests anymore, because if the end-to-end tests work, well, then everything inside in the middle worked as well. Type checkers, TypeScript, absolutely. This is a must. This will prevent you from doing 90% of the bugs, from writing 90% of the bugs in your code. Absolutely use TypeScript and type check everything. Progressive web apps, well, I guess at least service workers, storage, location. This is pretty much ad hoc. Like if you need it, use it. If you don't need it, whatever. So you can use just-in-time learning here. Server-side rendering, GraphQL. I wouldn't learn these things, like the server-side rendering and the static site generators. I wouldn't learn these two things separately. I would use a framework, particularly for 2022. Take a look at Remix. It's a really, really nice framework, and it has React inside. It's absolutely amazing. GraphQL, absolutely. If you can go for GraphQL instead of REST, always go for GraphQL, because if you do know GraphQL already and you use it from the start, your queries will be more efficient, which means they will take less time, but also less data will travel the network. So GraphQL is, for the most part, superior to REST. So definitely give it a try. What else? Gatsby might be worth it, but now that we have Remix, not so sure. And then we have desktop applications, Electron. This is again on a if you need it, like if you need React Native, go for it. If you need Electron, go for it. Otherwise, don't bother. WebAssembly is still too infant. It's not worth it, not yet. All right, what else do we have here? Let's go into the backend first, and then we'll jump on to React. So in terms of backend, once you know all that good stuff in terms of the front end, the only thing that I would recommend for the backend is two things. Actually, one thing that's not here, unfortunately, which is the Express framework. So definitely take a look at the Express framework. Express framework is really useful, really super easy to use. You can implement APIs super easily with Express, whether it's a REST API or a GraphQL API. It's absolutely amazing. And the other thing I would suggest you learn is a NoSQL database. Again, if your project requires SQL, then obviously you will need to learn it. but otherwise just go for a NoSQL database and try to understand the differences between SQL and NoSQL. One of the main differences is that SQL is going to be table driven, while NoSQL databases are going to be document driven. So they have a few important differences, and generally the NoSQL databases are more it's not dynamic, I want to say, more flexible, which is good. All right, so in terms of backend, that's pretty much it. Express and a NoSQL database. Between those, Mongo, absolutely. And everything else is, I guess, a little bit too complicated. I think something that you can also take a look into, but I wouldn't dive too deep, is authentication, right? Because most apps do have authentication. However, I think it's more worth to actually learn about a service that already implements authentication than to actually learn how to implement one. And for the most part, you shouldn't be implementing your own authentication mechanism because it's just so damn hard, right? So you have Auth0, you have Amazon's authentication, you have Google Cloud, you have Azure, you have Firebase, you have Vercel, you have so many authentication third-party systems that you can use, and they're reliable and they work well, so definitely use one of those. All right, the other thing you should be taking a look, of course, is React. React is the way to go for 2022. And honestly, it's like everything here, pretty much. So create React app, JSX, which is kind of a different way of writing a mix of JavaScript and HTML. Functional components over class components. Absolutely go for functional components. They're so much more easier, so much more easy to test and to write. Props versus state, conditional rendering, component lifecycle. So in this case, when they say component lifecycle, they're talking about hooks. If you're going for functional components, the use state and the use effect absolutely dominate the use effect hook. It's one of the most important hooks, if not the most important hook in React. The use state is very easy to dominate because it's so simple, but the use effect has a few tricks up its sleeve, so definitely dominate that. Also dominate writing your own hooks, important. The context API, the use ref, so you have the use context, use reducer, use memo, use callback, and use ref. Yeah, so definitely take a look at these common hooks. Higher order components. Well, if you want to abstract away some stuff, I'm not sure. I mean, if you're a beginner, don't go for that. Error boundaries, absolutely. This is very important. So an error boundary is if a component fails, if there's some problem with a component, you don't want the whole app to blow up, right? You want to contain that error, and you want to make sure that everything else in the app works correctly. You know, like if you have an app that has a menu and a left bar and a bunch of components, like let's say 3 or 4 components on the middle of the page, one of them fails, you don't want the app to crash. You just want that particular component to show an error message saying something failed, something was screwed up, but all the other components keep working and keep being interactive and communicating with the server, so everything still works. Fiber architecture, whatever. You can skip that for the most part. In terms of the ecosystem, let's see what we have here. So React hook form, I would definitely go for that. In terms of testing, we already talked about Jest and React testing library in Cypress. This is definitely the ones I do recommend in terms of routers. Go for the reach router instead of the The Reach router used to be better than React router, but now the React router is better than Reach router again. And I believe they are made not by the same people exactly, but there's some overlap. Server-side rendering, well, you know, again, it's like, now we have Remix. Remix is so much better than both of these. If you truly just want a static website, like a static site generator, go for Gatsby. If you want a full-blown, like full power, but also very easy to use server, go for Remix. Don't go for Next. So it's going to be a waste of time for you. All right, in terms of API calls, go for Axios, absolutely. Mobile, React Native, we already saw that on the other side if you need. And then state management, absolutely use the useState hook and use the context API as much as possible. And then if you need the particular use case for Redux, and then go for Redux, again, I will leave a link to a post that explains when you should use Redux. A lot of people use Redux just from the start. It's like, oh, state management, boom, Redux. No, that's wrong. It adds unnecessary complexity to your app, and you are paying development cost, and you need to be sure it's worth to get something in return. Okay, so Redux adds some really hard constraints, and they're only worth paying if you get the benefits for it. But I'll leave the link for that post that explains when you should use Redux. That post was made by the creator of Redux, so definitely take a look. And in terms of styling, just go for style components. And that's it. That's your roadmap for web development in 2022. And this website is really nice. So, you know, as you've noticed, there's a lot of stuff that I would just ignore. It's not really that important. It's gonna, you know, fall back into the background. Like Sass is gonna fall back into the background. CSS is so powerful now that Sass is becoming more and more useless compared to CSS. These architectures, no one uses this anymore. I mean, it's good to know if you happen to you know, to work on a project that has one of these architectures, but you know, if you're going to start something new, if you're going to build something new, not worth it. So as you've seen, there's quite a bit of stuff that I would ignore. So I'm just trying to point you in the directions that really matter. And that's it. This I'm just going to leave a list in the description for everything that I would recommend. And I'm also launching a course called Master VS Code, which is the primary tool. It's the most powerful tool a developer has. Is it's his editor, and I'm launching this course to make you a much more powerful developer with a lot of automations, integrations, linting, and all that good stuff. So if you're interested in that, I'll also leave a link in the description, so check it out, and have a good one. See you later. Bye.